everyone, and welcome to another video from Colour with Claire. So today I'm going to be showing you the ARTEZA watercolour range. So we've got watercolour real brush pens, which is water-based inks that's contained in these pens with a beautiful bristled brush on the end to create a very painterly effect when you add water. We've also got the 72 Expert watercolour pencils. These are artist quality and apparently give rich and vibrant colours, and clearly you can add water to create a paint effect again. We will also be looking at the paper range. So they have a premium watercolour pad, which is 300 GSM, so it's very, very heavyweight card. And it's cold pressed, which means it's the rough kind of watercolour paper, not the very flat, very smooth hot press paper. And then we'll also be looking at the ARTEZA Kids watercolour paper, which is still brilliant quality, it's still premium, but it's 200 GSM instead of 3, so it's slightly thinner, and there are upsides to that, which I'll be showing you a little bit later in the video. But first of all, I want to have a look at these real brush pens. So here are the brush pens. They have 96 individual colours, and they also come with an aqua brush or a water brush for you to use pretty much straight out of the box. So let's have a look at the packaging. Now it's got this very thin plastic covering all around it, which isn't the best, to be honest. It does just seem to pop up like that by itself. So I don't know as if I'd keep it in this box long term. I think it'd kind of annoy me. It's quite, you know, it wobbles around a bit, and I just don't think it's the most suitable packaging. I would have preferred something harder, like a tin maybe. So I'm going to pull out the pens and we'll discard this packaging. Before we do that, I'll just show you the back. So you can see that each and every colour has its own name and number, and they're all charted on the back as well. So the pens are held in these plastic trays. As you can see on this top one, we have our aqua brush. So I'll just pull that out. It's a nice kind of flat barreled aqua brush. It's labelled with the ARTEZA name, and I have just put a little bit of water in it just to prepare for this review. And it has a really long, quite thick brush nib on the end. You can of course buy different water brushes that have different thicknesses, so don't worry if you like colouring in really tiny spaces. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different trays of pens, and I'll go through them individually. So this one we start off with peaches, into yellow, orange, and then into reds. The second tray we come into the dark reds, through the pinks and into the pinky purples. Then the more bluer toned purples and into those dark blues. Up for the light blues, right through to the aqua and the greens. And then the true greens, which goes from dark to light. And finally, the last tray has the more earthy toned greens, your browns, greys and black. So what I'm going to do first of all is swatch all these out so that we can see all the different colours and how they actually look, not on the pens themselves, but the actual ink colour on paper. And I'm going to swatch those on the watercolour paper itself because it is made for watercolour paper. That's not to say that you can't use these pens on any kind of paper or in any of your colouring books. You just have to do a swatch test first to see that they don't bleed through. They shouldn't do too much bleed with them being water-based, not alcohol-based, but still always check in your colouring books. So I'm going to grab a piece of the premium 300 GSM watercolour paper. So I'll pull this out. It's got this glue binding at the top, which makes them really easy to remove, and it's really clean when you've removed it as well. And I'm going to get swatching. I'll speed this little bit up because it's going to take quite a while to swatch 96 different pens, and then I'll come back to you after. Okay, so there we are. We have finished our little pen swatches, and to be honest with you, I'm absolutely blown away by how vibrant the colours are from these pens, and they've laid down really beautifully, especially on the watercolour paper that they're made for. But you can see just these gorgeous azure blues, very, very bright, very saturated. Loving these bright tropical greens as well. You've got your chartreuses and that kind of range of greens. You have beautiful purpley blues, as well as loads and loads of different pinks. It almost looks like a lipstick swatch. The only thing I would say is it probably could do with a few more oranges, yellows and reds. That's probably where it's lacking, but everywhere else, absolutely wonderful. They laid down really, really nicely. They were very juicy, and with the brushes being tapered to a point, you can really get into small spaces with them, as well as kind of large coverage when you add the water, so they're really versatile as well. Now the actual pens themselves, if I just bring it up to camera, they have a clear lid and little waves that go across the bottom of the lid, and that kind of reminds you that these are a water-soluble medium, which is a nice touch. Then we've got ARTEZA on the barrel, real brush pen, and each and every single one has their name and number printed on the pen itself. So you don't have to keep referring back to the chart on the back of the box and seeing which is which. You've got it right there on the pen, which is super handy when you're charting. On the back, we've got all of the information, such as water-based ink, non-toxic, designed in the USA, conforms to all of these different things there. And yes, so really nice and thick pen. It feels very sturdy in the hand. It's not heavy though, it's lightweight. And on the back, you've got a little bit of a coloured end, which shows you the colour of the actual ink inside. So this one is Tomato Red A194, which is this one second to bottom here, and you can see that it really is quite close to the colour that's on the cap. Only that one anyway. If we pick another one out just at random, let's try this one here. This is Lavender A162, which is A162, it's down at the bottom, and you can see, yeah, it's almost a perfect match. So I'm not sure about the entire range, but those couple of samples I've just seen there, they do match up really nicely. But everyone likes to chart their pens and markers and pencils anyway, just to check. Now then, now that we've looked at the pens, I want to take a good look at the pencils. So let me just move these aside for now. We will be coming back to these in a moment. But here are the watercolour pencils from ARTEZA. Now these come in a beautifully sturdy tin. I wish that the markers had also come in a tin as well, rather than that plastic packaging, but hey ho. There are 72 pencils in the set, and they all share their names and numbers and colours with the original ARTEZA pencils that are the standard pencils. So on the back of the tin, you've got all of the colours and numbers there. As I say, exactly the same as the standard ARTEZA pencils. You open up the tin, and here are your beautiful pencils. Now I have given them a bit of a sharpen, but I've left a few of them just at the start so you can see how they come. They are sharpened, but they have a flat end. It's like it's been squared off, but I've sharpened them because you should always sharpen your pencils when you first get them. So you've got 3 trays, and I've put them in the order that I keep my ARTEZA pencils in, my original ARTEZAs, but they do come in a random order in the trays. So there we are, there are the 3. So you're starting off with all of your yellows, ochres, reds, kind of skin tone colours, peaches into pinks. Then we go into the lovely warm browns, cool browns, and then greens, coming into blues, purples, and your greys. So 3 different trays, and the trays are that kind of typical plastic, a little bit wobbly. You might want to take them out and store them in a different pencil case if you're going to be using them an awful lot, because these aren't really ideal to get in and out all the time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to swatch all of these, and then we will come back and then we're going to do an actual colouring project on the watercolour paper from ARTEZA. I've printed out this beautiful illustration, and we'll be using both the pencils and the marker pens to colour it. But before I do that, just quickly, I want to show you the pencil itself. So as I've mentioned, it is pre-sharpened. The barrel is a hexagonal barrel. So unlike the original ARTEZA pencils that are rounded, these are hexagonal, so you'll be able to tell them apart at a glance. Also, they have this little cute paintbrush on there so that you know that they are water soluble. And then on the back, you've got a very easily readable name, number and light fast rating. So exactly the same as the ARTEZAs, with the name and number on them, and the same colours as well. So really hope you will enjoy looking at these swatches, and then we will come back and colour in this beautiful illustration after. Okay, so there's our 72 watercolour pencil swatch chart all done. So as you can see, some really beautiful colours on here as well. These aren't as saturated as the pens. I've did the pens on the back, so I can just quickly show you again how beautiful and vibrant those colours are. And then the watercolours, you can see, just aren't, they don't pack as much of a punch as the pens. Now obviously this is because pencils are of course a dry medium and pencils are a wet medium, and they are going to be more saturated by nature. But I think that one of the plus points about the pencils against the pens is that you can decide how much pressure to put down on your paper, how much of that pigment goes down. You could do a really, really light layer of a colour and use a little bit of water just for a very slight tint of colour on the page, or you could press really hard and get a more saturated colour. So you've got that versatility with the pencils, whereas with the pens you're just putting down the ink and you know it's there. There's no real way that you can sort of change it up apart from obviously putting the water on it, but you can't change the sort of vividity of the colour. Anyway, I think that these watercolour pencils are a really nice budget option. They're obviously not going to compete or be as well performing as some of the watercolour pencils in high-end brands like your Caran d'Ache, your Faber-Castell, Albrecht Dürer, etc. But I think, you know, for the price, they are a decent contender for watercolours. 72 is a really nice amount of colours. And again, they do share their codes, their numbers and their names with the ARTEZA pencil range, the normal pencils. So you could kind of use both in conjunction and you've got the exact same pencil pigments there. I just didn't feel that the watercolour pencils were as pigmented as I'd like them to have been. There was a bit of a variation between the different pencils. So some of them were really super heavily pigmented. Like for example, A104 here, you barely had to touch the water to it and it became a paint. Others took a little bit more working, and as you can see, some of them still have retained their pencil lines after water has been added, which, you know, with the higher end pencils you wouldn't see. It would melt, you know, perfectly. So it really just depends on your preference and whether or not you're happy with the amount of colour and the way that these have melted with the water, or whether you are really serious about a watercolour medium and using watercolour pencils and you'd want something a bit more high-end that's got much more rich pigments inside. So now we are going to do our picture. So this is what I showed you before. This is a Mariola Budek illustration that I bought and printed from her Etsy store, link in the description. And it is such a beautiful little illustration of a girl cuddling her teddy. I thought we would print this on the watercolour paper and use both our pencils and our pens to bring this lovely little girl to life. So the paper that I've printed this on is from the kids pad that I showed you earlier. So that's this one here. And I printed it on this one rather than the premium watercolour pad because the premium watercolour pad is 300 GSM and it would not go through my printer. It may go through yours if you've got a bit more of a heavy duty printer than me, but I couldn't change any of the settings to make it go through. So the 200 GSM is still really nice and thick. It's still got that beautiful rough watercolour paper texture, but it went through my printer. So if you're looking for a paper that's nice and heavyweight and durable, but will still go through a printer, hopefully, then I would go for the kids pad rather than the other one. But if you're someone who draws on watercolour paper and then paints or what have you, then you would want the premium one because it is 100 GSM thicker and it's just, you know, you can tell it's a lot more better quality. So we're going to get started with this, and I'm going to be using both the pencils and the pens, and it's a bit of a fly by the seat of your pants one. I've not given any thought to colour combos or anything, so we are literally going to open the supplies and see how it turns out. Okay, so there we are. We've finished our beautiful illustration from Mariola Budek using our ARTEZA pens and watercolour pencils. Now, I specifically chose this image for a reason because I knew it had a lot of different features on it that I wanted to really test out with the pens and pencils, such as I knew that I was going to do a pen base with pencil on top for the hair. I knew that I wanted the skin to look really delicate and smooth, so I'd have to be really careful with how many how much pressure and how many layers I was putting down as well. And then on the teddy bear, I knew I wanted it to be a really rough, fuzzy, furry, cuddly kind of texture, so I needed to also be able to create that as well. And I think that me being someone who is not proficient with watercolour mediums whatsoever, I'm very much a beginner with watercolour, I just love everything about this. I love the way it's turned out. I love how quick a medium it is. So with me, usually as a coloured pencil user, I take hours and hours and hours on one colouring page on its own, because I try and make everything look smooth and flawless and perfect. And the thing about watercolour mediums is it's so quick, because you literally add a bit of pencil or pen where you want it and then wash over it with water. Very quick. Also, you don't have to be perfectly smooth with it. As you can see, I've created all kinds of different textures on this, and none of it is a perfect smooth gradient, but it all kind of looks very painterly, very artistic, and yeah, almost like it has been painted rather than coloured. So I'm really pleased about that. The pens themselves were fantastic. Some of them were slightly drier than others. They're all, juicy, but some of them were drier than others. But I was able to use that to my advantage to create this bare, fuzzy texture, because it didn't cover every single white speck of the paper on every single stroke, and that really helped bring that texture out. Same with the hair. I did the base layer with the markers first, as you saw, and that looked really rough and really blocky, but I was able to come in with the pencil without any water and then add in all the kind of hair lines, so it looks like there are individual hairs in that, and it gave it a lot more depth. I then used quite a bit of water on the skin because I wanted to make it very delicate with just a hint of the colour on there, just a hint of shadow, but leave a lot of white highlights, very delicate, very soft. And yeah, so I'm just really pleased with how it's turned out. Things I have learned is don't use too much water because it can bleach out your colour. Another thing I've learned is do not print it on a standard printer, try and print on a laser printer, because you will get ink that runs when you're using water. My printer's not laser, I don't know what the opposite one's called, but it does bleed when you put water on the lines. It's not been too bad on this one, I must say, but definitely use a laser printer if you're going to be adding water. What else have I learned? Just to embrace it really, and don't worry that things aren't looking perfectly smooth and flawless all the time. Keep it looking very rough, very like you've literally just painted this on a canvas, and it doesn't have to be perfect to look brilliant. So I really hope that you have enjoyed looking at the ARTEZA pens, pencils, and of course the beautiful watercolour cold press paper as well. All the links are going to be in the description, including the link for this illustration if you want to go and buy it from Mariola's Etsy page. If you've got any questions at all, please do let me know. And just as a final thought, as I've said, I am not proficient in watercolour whatsoever, but still I'm really pleased with how this turned out. I'm pleased that it's got me out of my comfort zone, and it might not be perfect, but it's perfect to me. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon on Colour with Claire.